Thank you very much, Director Williams, and somehow I like the sound of the Director Williams part. I want first to thank you for the honor you have bestowed upon me. I don't take it personally, but I take it as an expression of appreciation for all of the people on whose shoulders I stand, and certainly you and Earl and Stacy and to some degree Esther are people on whose shoulders I stand. There are a number of people in the audience on whose shoulders I also stand, and I'm not going to take the time to introduce them individually, but there are two people that I'd like to introduce to you, and I'm trying to develop them to stand on my shoulders. Julia Joseph and Jordan Joseph. Julia and Jordan, I want you to know that there is a story I often tell to remind people that this is going to be brief. I talk about an experience I had when I was in the Carter administration. I was in the South Pacific to swear in the governor of one of the American territories when I was asked to address a joint session of the legislature. Just before I was scheduled to speak, I leaned over to the speaker and I said, how long do I have to speak? And he said, Mr. Undersecretary, you are a guest. You may speak as long as you wish, but in about 20 minutes, the lights are scheduled to go off across the island. Well, I want you to know that I'm going to try to have that. Not because I'm afraid the lights are going to go off in the Peace Corps office, but I just think that brevity is one of the highest virtues. I am especially pleased to have been invited to help honor the legacy and celebrate the life of Franklin Williams. As Director Williams mentioned, I first met Ambassador Williams in Ghana in the mid-1960s. I was there as the leader of an Operation Crossroads Africa project, working in a rural village north of Kumasi, and he was the American ambassador who came out to see me from time to time, usually in a white suit and with white shoes. It was not surprising that Sergeant Shriver consulted with him in developing the Peace Corps, because he has been he's had both a keen interest in the work of Crossroads Africa and in the idea of international volunteerism more generally. He was strongly committed to diversity, both as an ambassador and later as president of the Phelps Stokes Fund. I especially remember a conversation he and I had some years later during an unplanned meeting in Addis Ababa about the need to get more people of color into leadership positions in foundations and other forms of organized philanthropy. He was especially pleased when a few years later, I was the founding chair of the Association of Black Foundation Executives. It is thus fitting that we pause tonight in his memory to honor these volunteers, to celebrate and affirm the Peace Corps' commitment to diversity, and to recognize and affirm our interdependence as one world, one people bound together in a common humanity. I want us to talk about the power of diversity and the globalization of volunteer service. But let me begin by acknowledging that these are difficult times to get people to think about, to talk about, and to help create a consciousness of our connectedness. These are difficult times conceptually because it is our peculiar destiny to live between two worlds, an old order that is dying but not yet dead, and a new order that is conceived but not yet born. All around us, we see the trauma of transition and the tragedy of division. We are divided by color and culture. We are divided by religion, race, and region. We are divided between those who are open to new ideas and those who are wedded to absolutes of the past. We are even divided between those who think and those who refuse to think at all. Many Americans feel such a strong affinity with the we group to which they belong and with which they identify that they fail to recognize the need to embrace the they groups with whom their destiny is intertwined. We are fortunate, therefore, that the Peace Corps experience brings people together against and across the many chasms that divide. It may be that your greatest legacy has been your ability to demonstrate that diversity need not divide, that pluralism, rightly understood and rightly practiced, is a benefit and not a burden, and that the fear of difference is a fear of the future. These are difficult times to celebrate and affirm our diversity, not only conceptually, but functionally as well. We live in a world that is integrating and fragmenting at the very same time. The more interdependent we become, the more people are turning inward to smaller communities of meaning and memory. For some Americans, this seems like a reason for despair. But it may be that the search for beginnings, even the focus on remembering and regrouping, represent the first stage of the search for common ground. As I travel around the world, I hear more and more people saying that until there is respect for their primary community of history and heritage, they will find it difficult to fully embrace the larger community of destiny and duty. For a time, those Americans seeking common ground with distant people in distant places thought that they would find it in the convergence of political cultures, with an emphasis on the ballot and the emergence of new democracies. Later, they thought that they would find it in the economic culture, with its emphasis on markets and the ties of an interdependent global economy. Increasingly, however, it appears that we find common ground not so much in the political or economic culture, but in the emergence of a transnational civic culture, with its emphasis on volunteer service and its ability to bring people together across old boundaries to participate in the development of communities. People around the world are coming to agree that a good society depends as much on the goodness of individuals as it does on the soundness of government and the fairness of laws. They are reclaiming responsibility for their lives through neighborhood associations and squatter settlements, forming cooperatives in rural areas, micro-enterprise in urban areas, housing associations, mutual aid associations, and various forms of self-help to improve local conditions. The events of the last several years, and especially this year, have caused us to think often and deeply about whether transnational community is really possible. I am convinced that it is, but it will require us to think and act differently. The paradigm of community that will best serve our efforts to build relationships abroad was best described by the Black mystic, poet, and theologian Howard Thurman, who was a contemporary of Franklin Williams. Thurman was fond of saying, "I want to be me without making it difficult for you to be you." That's it. Can you imagine how different our world would be if more Americans were able to say, "I want to be an American without making it difficult for Asians to be Asians, Africans to be Africans, or Arabs to be Arabs. Can you imagine how different our communities would be if more Christians were able to say, I want to be a Christian without making it difficult for a Muslim to be a Muslim, a Jew to be a Jew, a Buddhist to be a Buddhist, or a Hindu to be a Hindu? If volunteer service in the Peace Corps and in all the other international voluntary groups that have emerged in recent years, if this kind of service can help develop that sort of discernment, first in the ranks of volunteers and then abroad, then the Corps and the Congress can both feel rewarded. Volunteers around the world can feel appreciated, and we can restore respect for the values that give birth to our democracy. It goes without saying, however, that we must conduct our work abroad with a demonstration of respect for local traditions, local cultures, and even local concepts of community. While not as well organized and not as well supported as in the United States, the idea of helping neighbors in need, the idea of service as an essential part of the pursuit of happiness, can be found among many people in many places around the world. In South Africa, where I've been living full or part-time for the last 14 years, there's a concept of community called Ubuntu. It is best expressed by the Xhosa proverb, people are people through other people, which is to say that my humanity is bound up in yours. What dehumanizes you dehumanizes me. I belong to a greater whole, so I am diminished when others are diminished by oppression or treated as though they were less than who they are. It is not I think, therefore I am. It is I'm human because I belong. I participate. I share because I am made for community. The highest praise that can be given anyone in South Africa is to say that he or she has Ubuntu, which means that they are generous, hospitable, friendly, caring, and compassionate. And of course, they are forgiving. As you heard earlier, I was involved in the development and launch of City Year South Africa. And I can tell you that it would be both arrogant and plain wrong for anyone to promote or approach the promotion of volunteer service in places like South Africa as though it was a Western value rather than a shared value. The absence of a well-organized volunteer movement does not necessarily mean the absence of a service ethic. What Americans can bring is experience in how to mobilize, even experience in how to motivate, how to communicate an existing ethic, and how to coordinate existing energy. We meet tonight at a time of free-floating anxiety in our world. We've become so anxious as a people that we are anxious about the fact that we are anxious. These are without doubt difficult and dangerous times, awesome and almost apocalyptic times. Yet, there is reason for optimism, because moments of crisis and great change are often the moments of greatest possibility. They are the moments when we have to see and create possibility where there appears to be none. Moments when we have to call upon the strength within. Moments when we have to draw upon our faith in something bigger and more mysterious than the self. Real leadership often emerges in times like these because the most effective servant is the one who's willing to be a critic And the most effective critic is the one who is willing also to be a servant. British oppression of India gave rise to Gandhi. Apartheid in South Africa gave rise to Nelson Mandela. And segregation in the United States gave rise to Martin Luther King. This is thus a moment of great possibility, precisely because it is a moment of crisis and change. The historian Tacitus once defined patriotism as praiseworthy competition with one's ancestors. I recall that definition of civic virtue tonight to remind you that each generation has an opportunity, indeed an obligation, to contribute something as meaningful, as significant, and even as extraordinary as those who preceded them. It has been my experience that when neighbors help neighbors, and even when strangers help strangers, both those who help and those who are helped are not only transformed, but they experience a new sense of connectedness. Getting involved in the needs of the neighbor, whether nearer or distant, provides a new perspective, a new way of seeing ourselves, a new understanding of the purpose of the human journey. When that which was their problem becomes our problem, the transaction transforms a mere association into a relationship that has the potential for new communities of meaning and belonging. In other words, doing something for someone else, what John Winthrop called making the condition of others our own, is the most powerful force that I know in building community. When you experience the problems of the poor or troubled, when you help a community to find its own strength, you are likely to find that in serving others, you help create the conditions of enduring community. So let me conclude by reiterating to those who are being honored tonight, I hope that tonight you find yourselves and choose for yourself a life that helps fulfill your dreams. But I hope that the Peace Corps experience will cultivate an enduring impulse to help transform the laissez-faire notion of live and let live into the principle of live and help live. So let me conclude by saying that volunteer service, as you practice it in the Peace Corps, is an idea whose time has come, not only at home, but also abroad, because it provides not only help, but it also provides hope. The kind of hope that Václav Havel had in mind when he wrote, "I'm not an optimist because I do not believe that everything ends well. I am not a pessimist because I do not believe that everything ends badly. But I could not accomplish anything if I did not have hope within me. For the gift of hope is as big a gift as the gift of life itself." When you are asked then why you engaged in voluntary service, or why you're promoting voluntary service, tell them that you are providing not simply help, but you're providing hope. And the gift of hope is as big a gift as the gift of life itself. Thank you very much.